Lately, I've been applying some of my ideas from decades ago to a new problem. In the early 1990s, I worked on a method to estimate the body weights of captive sharks from pictures taken through the aquarium window from above. The method was cumbersome, clunky, and slow, but the notion stuck with me. My interests have shifted from sharks to unioted mussels. I've been tagging and recapturing fat muckets for many years. Specimens such as this have shown that, given enough recaptures over enough years, annual growth has been occurring among my study population. I've been using a protocol for computing volume based upon a geometrical figure called an ellipsoid. It basically uses measurements in 3 perpendicular directions to calculate a volume. However, all measurements aren't as easy or as reproducible as others. You may recall a presentation I gave a couple years ago where I showed that shell height measurements and shell width measurements were quite prone to human error, at least among a group of first-year students at my university. That said, I've still been able to detect statistically significant changes in ellipsoid volumes in my tagged fat muckets given time. For example, I found that they grew at an annual rate of about 3 cubic centimeters per year over several years. The trouble is, I'm not satisfied with knowing annual growth rates. Now, I've tried to find a size difference in tagged mussels encountered in summer and fall. For example, I measured 10 in June and September of 2022. A paired t-test revealed no significant growth in them over the 3-month period. And hey, maybe they just didn't grow. Or maybe using the ellipsoid volume protocol just wasn't sensitive enough to notice. I mean, an annual growth rate of 3 cubic centimeters a year works out to be around a quarter of a cubic centimeter in a month. Maybe I need a more precise tool. Sure, ellipsoid volume works okay given enough time, but perhaps I could find a tool that'd pick up smaller differences in size. Such a tool might perhaps rely on a combination of caliper-determined shell lengths combined with photographic analysis of shapes. 30 years on, I visited and updated my Sharky method, taking advantage of digital technology and adapting it to mussels. Valves of museum specimens were bound together with a rubber band and placed on a bed of dry rice. Top and side images were captured with a camera using a macro lens setting. Illumination was provided by 2 small panels of white LED lights. The images were analyzed with image J to get height and width measurements at 10 cross-sections along the length of the shell. If I assume that each cross-section is an ellipse, the estimated volume overestimates the shell's actual volume. If I assume that the cross-sections are lens-shaped, the values slightly underestimate the shell's actual volume. This led me to look at a shell from the end. Lo and behold, it didn't really fit either shape very well. Coincidentally, I ran across a chapter in an old book that resonated with my predicament and suggested to me another shape to try, the logarithmic spiral. Sure enough, that end view of a Silicoidea shell seems to be more like Thomson's logarithmic spiral than an ellipse or a lens shape. For one thing, the log spiral is fatter toward the top than it is toward the bottom. Pictures like this, however, only show the cross-sectional shape at the shell's widest and highest points. There's 9 other spots that my analysis looks at. What are the shapes of all those other cross-sections? If I had a micro CT scanner in the lab down the hall, I could easily answer that question. Not having that option, I went low-tech and visited my local hardware store. This is a tool called a contour gauge. Carpenters press it against oddly shaped objects in order to cut wood so it fits around them. I mounted my contour gauge in an antique drill press that was in the back of a cupboard in my garage. The finished machine allows one to bring the wires of the contour gauge down vertically onto a valve laying on a wooden stage, thus deflecting the wires to match the shell shape. I drew a picture on a card so I could capture the shapes at each of 10 equally spaced stations. An old cell phone captured images of the deflected wires. 10 trials along the length of this valve revealed the shapes at each station. Some of the stations look like either an ellipse or a lens. They're more or less vertically symmetrical, like station 9. Others are skewed more toward the dorsal side, like station 4, which sure looks like a log spiral to me. In summary, my little contraption showed that more than half of the cross-sections have log spiral shapes, while 3 look like either ellipses or lenses. Now, I'm not sure that I really need to dust off my calculus book just yet and try fooling around with fitting my data to log spirals. After all, my lens shape assumption does a pretty good job of estimating volumes. My purpose here was to share with you the idea of using a contour gauge in case you don't have the funding for a CT scanner. My scrappy little apparatus might just help you to answer some similar questions on the cheap.